Okay, so I will start by saying that it is such an honor to meet you. I am a huge admirer of you and your work, and I'm Samantha Fletcher. I have this podcast called Daily Border Crossings, which talks about, it's about people who feel like you have to cross the border to kind of be at a space because you're not included. I also am a student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education,
Mhm.
as is Silvana, who's on here. And then Kamille, who's on here, is a producer on the show, and we are all doing equity work. Silvana and I both do equity work. We're in the Technology, Innovation, and Education program, and
Okay.
we specifically do equity work for that program. So that's who we all are.
Good.
And we're just like so excited that you took the time to be with us. So we appreciate that. Okay. So I will get into first when I live in Maryland, and in fact my brother-in-law, his name is David Riley, but you've had thousands of kids, so students, you might not remember him, but he was a Meyerhoff
David
person.
Riley. I know David Riley.
Do
Yeah,
you?
I
Okay,
do.
well,
I sure do. Yeah, what's he
yeah.
doing now? What's he doing now?
So he was at IBM, but now he works for the Census Bureau.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, doing like IT, I don't know, like computer stuff with the Census Bureau.
Right. Tell him I said I haven't heard from him to send me a note and give me an update. Okay.
Oh my gosh, he's gonna be so excited. I will tell him that.
Sure.
Okay. So, and outside of Maryland though, when I talk to people, I'll ask people about you, or I'll tell them about you. And you have this legendary story, and some people know it, but I keep coming across people who don't know like the full story, like the history story and
Sure.
the story of when how you came to be in tech and all of that, and like this really what I find powerfully interesting story about like when you were young and you were really good at math. So
Right.
can I please, like, I want to change that and make sure that people know more people know your story. So well,
Okay.
I want to stop talking so you can share it. So uh will you please share that story?
Now you have to tell me which one you're talking. I've got a number of them, whether it's about civil rights or when I first saw my first PhD in mathematics. Which one are you talking about? Tell me that.
Okay, I'm talking about the civil rights one when you were a child.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I
Okay.
got it,
Okay.
got it. So, and I talk about this in an earlier book, Holding Fast to Dreams. I'm sitting in the back of church, not wanting to be there in the middle of the week, and my parents are placating me with the two things I love most: food. So I'm eating M&Ms, the good kind with the peanuts. I always say, everybody knows what that means. And I'm doing my math. I'm 12, and I'm doing this algebra problem,
What?
and all of a sudden, I hear the minister at the lectern say, if the children participate in this peaceful protest, all of America will understand that even our young people know the difference between right and wrong, and our children will be able to go to better schools. And we knew we had some great Black teachers, but we knew the resources were not in our schools. It was so obvious. And we sometimes got these hand me down books after white kids had used them for years. And it was
Mm,
very, very psychologically harmful to
right.
think you get the books after others have used them and they put brown paper bags around them, but you can see the name of the white school in the book. And I said, who is that guy? And they said, of course, his name was Dr. Martin Luther King. I went home and told my parents I had to go. They told me absolutely not. I called them hypocrites. They sent me to my room. The next morning, they came in and said, if this is what you want to do, we will let you go. But if you go, you're going to jail. And I decided I wanted to do it. And I always tell students I was not a courageous kid. I didn't get into fights. If the fight broke out, little Freeman was running the other way. All right. The only thing I ever attacked was a math problem. I love math problems, but I did go. It was a terrible week. We were treated like slaves, like animals, with too many kids in there, not enough bathrooms, on the floor. And in the middle of the week, Dr. King came in and said, "What you children do now will have an impact on children who've not yet been born." That was 1963, and we did see things happen after that that made a difference. But it always instilled in me that there's this connection between civil rights and learning mathematics, learning how to think well, to solve problems, even as we talk about speaking up and speaking truth to power. And that's that story.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that you just made me think about all the times that I was teaching. I taught kindergarten, I taught a year of middle school, um, and um, and I was a journalist for years
Oh,
and doing like equity work the whole time. But you just made me think about all the times that I encountered math teachers who would say things like, I have a hard time, I can't figure out how to relate this to equity, or I can't figure out how to relate this to justice. And it's just so interesting hearing you just say like there's a connection. I don't
oh
think
yeah.
people know how to make that connection.
Oh yeah, and someone there at Harvard who was there for years, my dear friend Bob Moses, and the Algebra Project really focused on that as he worked with children in Boston and using math word problems to talk about life itself. I would say that as I'm talking to children, and I enjoy spending time with kids in elementary school, kindergarten kids, whatever age, my 9-year-old grandson. And I'm always saying that math is a part of the universe. It's all around us, and
Mm,
that just as we human beings have to think about equity and fairness to everybody, we can think about, in very mathematical terms, we can think about ways in which solving problems from a book can relate to ways of solving problems in life, and how everything from percentages to proportions will relate to fairness. Very much
mm,
so, the fairness. When we think about the fact that the top 1% in American society has more money than the vast majority, large percentages of all those at the bottom, that
yeah.
is mathematics, and it is about equity. So in so many ways, we get a chance to see and to help children see and people see how knowledge of mathematics and thinking mathematically can bring about clearer understanding of where we have equality, where we do not. That's the idea.
So thank you. You mentioned the I'm gonna seize upon, you said which story, that one or your PhD story. So now you
Right.
gotta tell the PhD story.
I was in. I was in. I was going to the 10th grade, and I was accepted into a National Science Foundation program at Tuskegee, and
Mm,
I was younger
what?
than my classmates. Uh,
Obviously.
and they were from all over the country, and they were all. Um, it seems to me that they were all probably they were 2 or 3 years younger than I was. I was the kid in the group. I was 13, and they were 15, and some getting ready to turn 16. And it was very interesting. The professor came in and he put a problem on the board at Tuskegee, and nobody could solve it. And they were all frustrated. We were all frustrated. And he said, well, when somebody can solve the problem, come to my office and explain it to me. And he left. And they were so upset. Now, they were at an age where you can get really cynical. When you're 15 or so, you can get really cynical. When you're
Yeah.
13, you're more like just looking around, what's going on?
Right.
And I said stupidly, I said, well, this just means he believes in us. This just means that if we work on this, he thinks we can get this on our own. And they said, that's not fair. He's supposed to just tell us the answer. And so we had this big argument. My naivete, I just kept saying, no, I think he believes in us. And I was able to push them with my being younger to just keep working on the problem. We finally did solve it. But as he was leaving the room, somebody said, well, that's doctor, and they called his name. And I said, he's not a physician. They
Hmm.
said, no, he's a PhD. I said, well, what's a PhD? And they said, oh, that's the highest degree you can get in these different disciplines. I said, that's what I'm gonna get, a PhD, because I wanted to be like this guy and come up and put a problem on the board and challenge students.
Mm.
Give it your all. And so every day from age 13 in the morning, I would get up out of the bed, go to the mirror, and I would say, good morning, Dr. Hrabowski. And I did
What?
that until I got my PhD.
What? That's
My girlfriend in college heard me do it one day, and she says, "You know, I've always thought you were crazy. Now I know you're crazy." True
um.
story. True story.
So when did you get it? Because I did you go to
When
college?
I would think it was 24. 24.
What? Okay,
Uh-huh.
that's crazy. Okay. Um. All right. Silvana and Kamille, if you want to jump in, you also can. I wanted to ask. Well, it sounds like I was going to ask why it's math and technology, but I see that you had a love for math. But why did you recommend the technology field in particular to so many people? What was it about?
You know, when I think STEM, I think science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and I think technology is important across those disciplines and many more. As we think about data science, for example, we're seeing students and colleagues learning more about how we use the tools of data science in the social sciences and humanities. As we think about big data, as we think about applications in real life. And so I am, at this point, I'm saying to people to think about what Jim Collins calls the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. It's not just about one discipline or another, it's about how you connect disciplines. And if you think about data science as being a combination of computation and computing with statistics, and you think about all of what we're doing with data and ways in which we're working to understand trends and analytics, we will need people grounded in the social sciences who are also with skills in computing, just as we need people in technology areas who are studying problems, solving problems from science and engineering all the way over to issues involving economics, poverty, healthcare, those kinds of issues. So you hear about health informatics, for example. We can get all the nursing informatics, so more and more we're seeing, just as we think about the Internet of Things, the idea that technology is everywhere. Everything we have is technology. Right. We understand that we need to include that in everything that we do. And if you think about at the undergrad level, when you're going into computer science, you're going into engineering, there's a foundation in mathematics that people expect. Always.
Right.
Got to get about through a certain amount of calculus, for example. But when you think about teachers in K through 12, there's quite a bit involving not only computation and being able to be comfortable in the use of technology and solving problems, but usually you will see some connection between the technology and math and science. And I'm suggesting we need to help teachers in social studies and teachers in history and other areas also have more grounding in the use of computing in solving problems.
Okay. The TIE program, Technology Innovation and Education program at Harvard, is about technology, and where we are encouraged to find solutions to all sorts of problems, from like getting the creative curricula to designing apps and all sorts of things, designing all kind of stuff that we've been doing in this year-long program. But thinking of a place like Harvard, because there's still some work that needs to be done. So what do you think they need to know and do to have, I guess, kind of attract more diversity, or not only that, but to like keep it diverse?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I just gave a talk to the Harvard Division of Science a few weeks ago for MLK. And
yes, yeah.
And really enjoyed working with the Dean of Science there and others. I would say that at every level, whether talking about pre-K through 12 or at the university level, we should be looking at ways of bringing more people of color, African Americans, Latinx, others, Native Americans, and more girls and women into the work of technology. What we see at the undergrad level nationally is that under a quarter of the computer science majors, for example, are women.
Right.
We also see that too few teachers have been given the opportunity to become comfortable in using technology. We need ways for far more professional development for teachers as we think about the curriculum, as we think about teaching and learning. My campus, UMBC, is working. We produce about a third of the IT graduates in the state of Maryland, and at least 20% are Black of that number. But we are also producing more women in these areas. But we are working with schools in the city. We are outside of the city in that Baltimore-Washington corridor, but we're working with Baltimore City schools, Lakeland Elementary, and a consortium of those schools to help children and teachers, to give them support by bringing our STEM scholars, they're Sherman scholars, who are experts in math and technology and science in to work with children and to be supportive of teachers in looking at different ways of using technology in enhancing instruction itself. And we need many more opportunities for universities and students to work with K through 12, pre-K through 12, in strengthening teaching and learning, in giving teacher support, and in working in groups with students. My campus is known for innovation. We're in the top 10 using that US News list, usually because of all the work we do in course redesign and technology, not only in science. If you look at our Chemistry Discovery Center, you'll see students working in groups using the technology. Nobody's with paper and pencil, with everybody having a special role, a provocateur, a technologist, a facilitator, the leader, and solving problems coming out of the companies in our research park. But similarly, we've got programs across the disciplines where we're using technology in the teaching of writing, for example, in digital humanities, in imaging and digital arts, including work that we do in the city involving diversity and the use of technology. So that the notion for any institution is, how are we thinking out of the box about how best to engage students, and students of all races, women and men, people in general, in such a way that we are getting the message through both at the K through 12 level and at the university level. That would be my response.
Thank you. Silvana, this sounds like we need to work here. It's like I'm thinking about all the design you do, and I'm thinking about myself as a writer and ed tech, and so I'm like, I need to apply to be
a media literacy. Our media and communications program is heavily technology based.
Yeah.
Strong writing skills, use of technology, looking at social media, looking at careers that will allow you to do a variety of those things. And at the heart, clearly good thinking skills, good writing and speaking skills, knowing how to work in groups, but then facility with the technology and evolving, emerging technologies that can be used in that work. Very important.
I hadn't thought of this about being like, we want to be professors at your school, but like that's a subject we'll come back to.
You never know. You never know.
You never know. Okay, another thing I was gonna actually, you know what? There's a student who is in our program, TIE, Drakshan, who couldn't be on the call, but she's in London. And I think she caught your talk on the 5th. So she submitted a question. She says, okay, from Drakshan, you devoted a substantial amount of time supporting minorities from STEM subjects and even co-founded the Meyerhoff Scholars Program. I'm like, okay, you're in London. I'm glad you know that. Right. Which has been known for educating African Americans who go on to earn doctorates in STEM disciplines. What has this journey been like for you? I think you told us a little bit about that. And what have you noticed that has changed from the start of your journey to now in terms of minorities in STEM and barriers that did or do still exist?
Sure. I know that we are still producing students in STEM areas that are the first to get PhDs. First Black woman from University of Michigan in computer science is one of our graduates. She's now faculty at University of Florida. First Black guy to get a PhD from Purdue. It's one of our graduates. And this is all in the last 10 years. So you still see the first 1 or 2 or 3 in a lot of these disciplines getting these degrees. What I've learned, and so what we are having to make sure we help students understand, even at the undergrad level, is be prepared to be a pioneer. Wherever you go, if you're in STEM and you are Black or Latinx or a person of color, and sometimes a woman, you will be one of a small number, quite frankly. And so you've got to, we've been working to make sure we give students as strong a sense of self, to believe in themselves, to not allow themselves to be made to feel ordinary, first of all. Number 2, we have really worked to get students to think about, as they go to get PhDs and MD PhDs, that they remember, if at all possible, they want to look at possible careers in the academy, in universities. Because in many of our students, some of whom got PhDs from Harvard, they were attracted, and I said this in that last talk there, they were recruited by a consulting firm, given a big shrimp cocktail, and before you know it, a big salary, and they were off. They were leaving being a professor. They were all the way. They were going on to be big time consultant, which is okay, but we need some who are going to become professors. because most people don't see anybody looking like themselves, either in high school in technology or in college, and we need them there too. And then we have others, though, who were interested in using technology and STEM to build wealth.
Okay.
And that's the other part I would say. We have over 100 companies in our research park at UMBC, and 30% of those CEOs of those companies are women, and 25% people of color, heavily African American. These are African Americans who have started biotech companies, who started cybersecurity companies. And so we need the ecosystem that has some people going into entrepreneurship with technology, others thinking about the academy and working at university, others who are thinking about pre-K through 12. We need them across the sectors. And we've learned a lot about how to listen to the interests of students as we think about the direction in which we will move that path for each person.
So that has changed, right? When you were in this, you saw not many people who looked like you.
No. When I was in grad school, nobody. It was just a very few. Nobody on the professoriate, and nobody moving on to PhDs. Usually, very rare. Used to being the only one in my class in grad school, but more than that, seeing how much things remain the same, in that even as I send 35, 40 years later, as I'm sending students on to grad programs, or somebody ought to work in Silicon Valley, and they're saying, Doc, here I go again, being the only black in the room, you get that. We think about technology. One of my students recently became the first black to earn the highest award given to young investigators in neuroscience in the world.
What?
Now he's an MD PhD in neuroengineering, neurobiology. He has invented a pacemaker for the brain to address schizophrenia and bipolar. Big deal. His name is Dzirasa, Dzirasa.
Wow.
And he's an endowed chair at Duke now, young, in his early 40s. But when he was getting the award, he texted me, big room of neuroscientists from around the world. He said, Doc, the only blacks here are the 2 black students I brought with me. All the neuroscientists in the world, the 2 blacks I brought with me. That's what I mean when I'm saying we're still, even at this point, in so many cases, still the only one in the room, or somebody we're bringing along. When I spoke for the 75th anniversary of Vannevar Bush, who wrote the big report on our country and on science and technology, I could count blacks in one hand in a huge room at the National Academy of Science. And I said it that day. One was me, one was Dr. Shirley Jackson, physicist who's black president of Rensselaer, but a couple of grad students, and that was it. So these disciplines in science and technology, whether in the professoriate or in Silicon Valley, are still heavily male, heavily white, and of course some Asians also. But you do not see large numbers of African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans in those groups. I mean, we have a long way to go, is what I'm saying.
I'm gonna ask one more question. I actually have also a question from a Native American. I'm gonna let these other people ask. So at the ed school, there's a good bit of intentionality put into equity and inclusion. They're happy to have me. They're happy to have Silvana. They're happy to have us, help how we can. So there is a lot that they get right. Yet I have had some women of color in my time there share with me that based on some experiences that they've had since they've been there on the tech side, they sometimes feel unheard or sometimes wonder if this field is for them. So now today is International Women's Day. I did not plan it that way, but this is exciting that we're talking to you on International Women's Day. And so what advice do you have for women who, particularly Black women and women of color who are at an elite institution or who get into it and then start kind of getting hesitant? So they're at a place with a great deal of access, but still feel, worried or scared or.
I hear you. I do hear you. And I was taking notes, and by the way, it went out for just a minute on me. Mine did, but it came back on as you were talking. Okay. But let me just say this. One of the points I make in my TED Talk, the 4 pillars of success in science, is science and technology. Number 1, high expectations, not just for students, but for the institution. The question is, what should be expected of every university, whether it's UMBC or Harvard, and a faculty to support people, to bring them in, to make them feel that they're not on the periphery, but are an important part of the enterprise. Number
Okay.
two, building community. And this is the point I would make to students, to grad students, the importance of building your own cabinet, kitchen cabinet of people you have to give you support. You
Yeah.
need that. It's very important. Number three, finding allies as a part of that community. People can be reasonable, faculty and others that can give you support, because there will be times when you get discouraged. There were
Yeah.
many
That's
times
yeah.
I was in grad school when I would get discouraged. And then finally, though, finding the right mentor and champion. And often that's going to be somebody who may not be either your gender or your race. When you've got a few, you can, but as a rule, you want to find, I mean, I've always had to find people who didn't look like me who would give me support, because there was nobody ahead of me usually
Yeah.
that I could look to, or not in my field, not in whatever. I can find them in other areas. And I say that to say there are always some good people wherever you go. You have to
Okay.
find them and ask people, who can I go to get
Yeah.
support? Because that advisor and that mentor are critical.
Okay.
And I make a distinction between a mentor and a champion. The mentor
Hmm.
listens to you, gives you support, you can go to them and get help. A champion will knock down doors for you. Why is it that she didn't get that interview? We'll call people. I have colleagues, and I like to be a champion for people to say, I don't understand how she couldn't at least get an interview. Or what is it that she didn't have? What feedback have you given her? You need somebody like that, because that's what other people get. They get the benefit in so many ways of mentorship and championing advice without even realizing they're getting it. This is what we mean by true privilege. When we are
Right.
people of color and you walk in a room, you have another challenge. You just do. That's
Yeah.
just real. That is the way of the world. But
Right.
the message to people is, number one, I don't have time to be a victim. Number two, I'm not going to let other people define who I am. Number three, I'm going to find the good people of all races who will help me out. And number four, I'm going to take that help. I'm going to ask for constructive criticism and have tough skin so I can get better and better and better. You know this as a writer. Good writers know the importance of the iterative process. You write something and people will attack it. And you go back and forth and you get it better and better. Same thing is true in becoming a leader. Same thing is true in becoming somebody in technology. We have to have a kind of approach that says, make me better. Bring it on. Tell me what I'm not doing right.
Yeah.
You want to let people know, no, I can take constructive criticism because I want to be the best. That's the
Okay.
idea.
The speaking of Native American, the quote the question that she had, her name is Loyola. She is one of 6 in our program. She asked, you just covered it. She said, many academics point to mentorship programs to get through STEM. What is your stance on that? And it just sounds like you just answered it, right?
Oh,
Like,
you cannot make it by yourself without other people who will work with you, and without somebody who is at another level who can reach back and say, I'll give you support. You've got to have that.
okay. Okay.
People have it. I'll never forget, and I was director of our advanced program for women in science, and people were surprised that I said I would do it. I said, well, I'm president. I want some of my colleagues who are women who are department chairs to be co-directors, but I want to make the point that men should be as concerned about the paucity of women in STEM as whites should be about people of color, Native American, African American, Latinx. That we all need people of all races, because these are human issues that we're dealing with. American issues and then broadly, globally, human issues. And I will tell you, we were having a discussion about mentoring, and one of my white male colleagues said, well, I've never had a mentor. And one of the women said, every time you and so go out and play golf, he's mentoring you. When you all go to play basketball, he's mentoring you. When you go into the bathroom together, he's mentoring you. I don't get that. So you don't even realize it, but you're just getting the benefit of it because you're just alike. And he's just telling you what he did. I don't get to
Exactly.
go in the bathroom with you. I don't get to play basketball. This was a white woman saying it. It was powerful. It really was. Said that men don't often realize that some men gave them a pulled them along the way. They
Right.
don't realize that. Women and people of color understand that we need somebody to give us that support also.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Silvana.
Dr. Hrabowski, thank you so much for being here. This
Yeah,
was such an honor.
thank you.
And I'm trying hard not to fangirl a little bit, but thank you again. Oh my gosh. So my question is about so I'm in a class at HDSC that talks a lot about kind of inspiring young people's and developing young people's critical consciousness, how we can do this in multiple different disciplines. I think that sometimes these discussions about critical pedagogy get pushed to English classrooms, ELA classrooms, history classrooms. And I'm really interested, as the daughter of a biology teacher and a biologist, I'm really interested in how we can develop STEM classrooms that also develop young people's critical consciousness, regardless of their age. So I guess my question for you is, what ideas or suggestions or tips do you have for STEM educators to create their classrooms in a way that can help young people develop their kind of critical reflection around societal inequities, can develop their self-efficacy, and also can inspire them to take action within their communities or globally?
It's a great question. So one of the most impressive science classrooms I've ever entered involved being in a heavily minority community in the southern part of my state and in Charles County. And I was in this lab and I was talking to the students, largely minority children, some white kids, but largely minority, Black, Latinx, and others. And I'll never forget, I began quoting a poem, and the whole room started quoting it with me. And it was a Langston Hughes poem, Hope Faster Dreams, for if dreams die. And I said, what's going on? And later on, I did another one, and they did it. And then they all were laughing. I said, why are you laughing? And then they had me look at the walls. This science teacher had put up people of color in science and in the humanities all around the room. And she had poems. It was wonderful. And famous scientists, Black and Latino, all around the room as dreams and visions. And they had taken time in a science class to learn the poetry. And I was so impressed. I was just so impressed. And they were so proud to show me these scientists they saw, Black men and women and others, Latino, but also the poetry, and to know that a scientist could learn poetry, you see, to start there. And then secondly, I am always a believer in giving children word problems that relate to their own experiences. Very much so, very much so. And that means Bob Moses always did problems involving using the subway there in Boston, for example, with kids. But I would say helping them understand more about percentages and what we see in certain neighborhoods and not other neighborhoods. We actually had a program with one of the national agencies where kids got a chance to look at the overabundance of asthma in the homes of people of color in the inner city compared to what happens in other places based on the quality of the air, you see. And it's just fascinating to see the eyes open of kids realizing that this is about environmental justice, but also about understanding these challenges through the eyes of science and math and asthma and the rate in the city versus certain neighborhoods in the city versus other neighborhoods, and having them going around to interview people in that process. We've done the same thing in engineering, as an example, having students have a project of listening to the problems that people in a certain neighborhood, tough neighborhood in Baltimore have, and finding out that one of the issues involved the fact that people who had handicaps and older people didn't have ramps and needed ways, and then deciding to build some in certain places so they could use wheelchairs. Or when we've sent kids in our Engineering Without Borders from engineering to psychology to spend the summer over in orphanages in certain African countries where there's not running water, and to look at the contamination of the water in relationship to the illnesses that those children had. But in the same time, learning how to interview people who are so culturally different, and then building structures to bring clean water to that village, you see, and then coming back to talk about it here. And I mean, I could go on and on with all these examples. Just one more. We have these innovation grants that we give. They call Hrabowski Innovation Grants. They raise money after I'd been at the university 20 years. I didn't want it called after me because I said, you only name something after somebody when they're dead. And they laughed and they named it after me anyway. So it's these Hrabowski Innovation Grants. You get them from any discipline, but often they involve something with STEM in some other area. And it's to use technology, cross disciplines, and to deal with social justice issues in many cases. So the one that I really loved involved our imaging and digital arts area, where a computer science professor and a history professor worked with their classes, history majors and computing majors, to build a game focusing on the War of 1861 in Baltimore, the Pratt Street Civil War in Baltimore, which actually occurred in the same block area of Freddie Gray, the riots in Baltimore in 2015. And they built into the game issues involving race and poverty and prejudice and death and violence and solutions, and built the game in such a way that high school kids would be able to play it. But the history majors were learning more about coding, computing majors more about history, all about race and racism, you see. And it was an excellent way of showing people outside of the social sciences that we all should be involved in these kinds of challenges. Many examples like that. But so whether you're in middle school, elementary school, or college, there are ways of connecting STEM and its work to real life problems. The voting that went on, the percent of voters, quite frankly, for little kids, Republican, Democrats, and what does that mean about race? Disaggregating data, right? And looking at who voted for whom and why. I mean, that's civics, but you can do that with data science. You're looking at the trends. You know, that so many people, what percent voted for this person or that person at the city level, the state level. There are many ways, and giving teachers the chance to imagine the possibilities. That's what's important.
Great question, Silvana. Is there anything Dr. Hrabowski can't answer? Okay, so we've had two people join us, Channing, Sherman. So Channing and Kamille and I we were all reporters in Augusta, Georgia back in the day. And then we went our separate ways and did stuff. Kamille is that she just entered the PhD program at UNC Charlotte, but she was also an English professor at Livingstone College. Okay. And then Channing, tech something in Charleston, College of Charleston, and Claribel, who is a fellow TIE Harvard student. So they're all on here. So Channing has a question next. Go ahead, Channing.
Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having this. Just to kind of follow up on what Samantha said, I've worked in web development, either in journalism or in higher ed for over 10 years now, and I'm a big STEM supporter. And one thing that you hear a lot of companies say when it comes to minorities is, oh, we're not getting minority applicants, or we're not getting qualified minority applicants. Sure. And I'm just wondering, what can they do? I feel like they need to be coming out and doing more recruiting, because one reason they're not getting a lot of applications is because we've been burned in the past. Yeah. You know, if you get bitten by a snake once, you're not going to reach for that snake the second time. So outside of, you know, setting up a booth at a job fair, what can some of these companies do to actively recruit minorities?
Right, and we are popping with people there all the time at UMBC because we're students from every possible race and group, and people want them. But what I will tell you is building relationships. More important than anything else, building relationships with institutions that are not short-term, in it for the long haul. And that means opportunities for faculty to work with people in the company. Some of my faculty work on research projects with companies, multi-layered. Others are working to get students internships. Name of the game, internships. If you want a full-time job, get that internship while in the summertime. Others are working part-time during the year, whether it's in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, or students who are not even in technology, who are working in areas, whether it's in HR, marketing, design, graphic design, all kinds of areas, but getting experiences while still in college. Now, I will tell you something that surprises people. I think sometimes the intelligence community broadly is more enlightened when it comes to equity and inclusion than universities. They work with a lot of children, kids. A lot of my freshmen have already worked at the National Security Agency or other national agencies in the Baltimore, DC area while in high school. So when they come to us, they've already had a couple of years of experience, whether it's in cyber, or in other areas, or at NIH in some of the scientific labs, and they know they have good hands in science, or they're already doing some coding, and then NSA sponsors programs for girls in coding for our middle school girls, and this is a lot of girls of color, from suburban to inner city schools to rural schools. So coding, for example, to build those relationships, because you think of the national agencies are also employers. But Northrop Grumman is one of our big partners. And they partner with us with inner city schools, and engineers of color and others come and work with us at a STEAM center at some of our schools at Lakeland Elementary. They give us money to support the kids. We're working to get them ready to come to the university one day. We're working to get them ready to become employers at the company. So when you got places like Northrop Grumman doing so much, and there are others that we're working with at the college level, from T. Rowe Price all the way over to McCormick, places that I'm very familiar with, to Lockheed Martin, a number of companies that are working to get students involved in college and sometimes even before college to get them started. But it does mean long-term relationships so that people can believe and trust. And the more people of color you bring into a company, the more of them you can get, because people of color can attract more people of color if they're having a good experience.
That's an important one. If they're having a good experience.
If they're having a good experience. Otherwise, they can be recruiting and you're talking to them and you see them going, people can tell you in many ways you don't want to come here, right? That's a university or a company. It's very important to know that they're having a good experience. It's very important. Yeah.
It is, right? Because they can tell me like, oh, no. I heard about this place.
Okay.
All right, Kamille.
Yes, thank you so much. I just kind of have been thinking for you talking about like where you began. I know you, quotation marks, I don't know you, but I watched for little girls, I've seen like lots of interviews related to the Children's March. So that's how I in my mind, that's how I know you. I'm not taking, I can really get zoomed to work.
You know me.
In listening to your story and kind of the work that you do, I remember from when I used to work at a museum that Ophelia Delane, she was one of the daughters of Reverend J. Delane, who had a big case in South Carolina to help like desegregate the schools. And her big quote in one of the exhibits was, we had segregated schools, great teachers, but we ended up, because of the resources, not knowing a lot of math, not knowing a lot of science. Yeah. That always like stuck out to me, because here we are, 21st century, very STEM based. And her critique of, education in the 60s and the 50s was that the resources weren't there. I still see classrooms underfunded. Yeah. And I love this vision that you're casting of, multicultural tech, how to build it all together. But I'm wondering about, just with the digital divide that we see that COVID has exposed, with the idea that we know a lot of Black and Brown students go to schools that are historically underfunded. How do we get access? How do we make sure that the talent is able to kind of meet the challenge of the 21st century with getting those things? And I wonder if you've seen it in your work, or if you have any way to tackle it. I know that's a lot.
That's an excellent question. Are you in South Carolina now?
I'm actually in North Carolina.
Oh, what part? Where?
I jumped the border. I'm in Charlotte.
In Charlotte. So are you at UNC? USU in Charlotte?
Yes.
Okay, so my goddaughter is there working on a PhD in curriculum, I think. Erin Lewis, look her up. She was an English teacher. She's my goddaughter. We're Southern. We say this kind of stuff in the middle of a show. But let me just say to you that your question is an excellent one. There are several issues. Number one, there are many schools that are underfunded, that don't have the resources, and therefore teachers are strapped. And they're strapped not just because of the resources, but because children haven't had the support and their families haven't had the support they needed well before the child got to school. If we look at an advantaged child whose parents went to college and they have the resources they need and the books in the home, and you look at the vocabulary of that child at 5 compared to a child who's not had that background, you see a major gap even at the kindergarten level in the level of vocabulary. You start there, and one thing builds on another. And I'm not blaming parents. I'm just saying, if people haven't had the support to know what they need to do, if they haven't had the education and support, then children are not getting all that they need in those first years. My wife, before going into corporate America, worked in early childhood for years. And I was always in grad school when she was doing child psychology, fascinated by the importance of the first 5 years in brain development that we know now more about. It's very important. So we have to look, first of all, at what we're doing to help children even before they come to school and the support that they need in special programs. And then how we support teachers who have less resources than advantaged schools, bringing in children who are less prepared than wealthy kids. And so we got a double whammy there if you think about it. I mean, the schools that bring in children who are from low-income backgrounds should have far more resources than very wealthy schools, quite frankly, because there's more work to do. There just is. And I'm a strong believer in after-school programs, summer programs, weekend activities. Much of what we do with some of the schools in Baltimore will involve the after school and the summer programs, I think, to keep supplementing. Because what we know is that if you go to cities around this country and you look at test scores, and test scores do matter, I think it is it's not that test scores are the end and all, but it is a factor. They are a factor in knowing what children can do in terms of reading and mathematics. What you will see is that the level of proficiency for Black and Latino Native American children will be well below 35–40%. In our cities, whether you're talking DC and Baltimore, average level of proficiency among children of color, probably 20%. So when we work with schools and get kids up to the national average in our state, for city children, Black, Latino, Native American, and we say that the state average is almost 50% at proficiency, that's telling you two things. We've done a hell of a job to get them up to that level, that many. But I'm also saying half the kids in the state of all races are not reading and computing at proficiency level. So there are two issues here. One for kids who are poor, one for many kids who are of color, to get them up to the average, and then that the average is very low in terms of the percentage who are proficient. So we've got both those issues to deal with. There is such a need for greater emphasis on building reading and thinking skills using technology for disciplines, including math and science. Even as we do what my friend Jim Comer says, looking at the whole child. I chaired the Obama Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans, and it's very important. We want to talk to math and reading, but we have to talk about all those other qualities that go into helping a child to be able to navigate a difficult world. And that's about a sense of self and getting that sense of love that the child needs and learning how to be disciplined and resilient. All those go into those other factors involving reading and math. So it is a very complicated issue. I'm hoping that this next administration will tackle the problem at the very core.
All right. Thanks, Channing. Claribel, do you have your question? I know we're coming up on time. We're watching the clock, Dr. Hrabowski, but we got questions for you. You're too good for we can't stop.
Sure.
Thank you so much for being here today. I actually had a two-part question, but I think you touched on my second question, so I won't ask it. You said earlier that you think that teachers need the freedom to dream. So I guess my question is, how would you convince administration that teachers deserve the room to dream? And my other question was, what systems do you think need to be in place for freedom dreaming? But I think that you, in the last question, like you answered a lot of that.
Sure, I appreciate it. It's a great question. This is neat, again, for balance. you hear me saying like a broken record, genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. There's certain work that has to be done, we know, in those subject areas. We've got to get that done. But I do think, and I recommended this 30 years ago. I chaired a STEM task force for our state 30 years ago, and then I just chaired this commission for the President Obama in his last few years, and then I did one for the National Academies. But when we talked about K through 12, teachers need the opportunity for both support, professional development, and I like your term dreaming. They need opportunities to be able to sit with others and brainstorm about what's possible. When I talk about the innovation grants that my university gives, that's about giving people the chance to dream. That's about giving them a chance to work with somebody else in another discipline and get out of the box. What might we do to excite students? How do we tackle some of these problems? How can we use technology in that process? And how can we have the time necessary to do the dreaming and then the implementation of the dream? And that does require looking at the culture of a university or of a school to say, how can we give some people, you may not be able to do it for everybody all the time, but there should be some room for that kind of creativity, because that's what the word to me means. When you talk about dreaming, you're talking about being able to be creative, do something different, excite students, excite teachers. And there should be some incentive, some kind of grant funding to give people the opportunity, time-wise and money-wise, to do that. Places that want to get beyond the business as usual, find ways of providing people with that kind of time and some funding to do some things in that way. Very important. It's an important question, it really is, because we need to have dreams in education. You're absolutely right.
You know, to piggyback on Claribel's question, sometimes when you're at a school, the administration, like you are dreaming, you have all these creative things, and the administration's just not. It's just, you go to a new school. What do you do?
Well, I'm hoping that we prepare more administrators to be more than bureaucrats. And that, I don't mean that to be disparaging, because people work hard in their jobs, but I've always wanted to keep the wisdom of a child in my leadership. And what do I mean by that? There's a word, neoteny, Neoteny. It's from science, but it means forever young. Forever young.
Oh, I like that word.
Always thinking about what you can do. And there was a book written and published by Harvard Business School entitled Geeks and Geezers. And the geeks were under 30 and doing amazing things. And the geezers were all over 70 and still doing it. What did they have? What did these geezers have? It was neoteny. It was neoteny. It was the idea of, wow, I am going to stay excited. What happens as we get older? And when I was young, I couldn't say this, but I just celebrated my 50th wedding anniversary. I am now 70 years old, and I can say what I want to say. I can say it. When we get old, we tend to get cynical. Been there, done that. But my young people, my students and others say, no. And what I love about youth, whether you're talking about a 12-year-old or somebody 40, is that they can knock down things because they don't even know they can't do it, and they just do it. As we get older, if we're not careful, we get cynical. And we said, been there, done that. First time you hear somebody say, been there, done that, they're burned out. They need some help. But younger people will say, why can't I do this? Mm-hmm. I want to knock it down and move ahead. And we need that. We need that in education. We need that sense of being forever young, of dreaming, of discovering the new thing, of listening to the humor of children. I mean, my students text me all day long. They keep me energized and younger because they're always telling me the real deal. And they're telling me when we as universities can sound like just full of stuff or not understanding what they're going through. We need people in education who can relate to children, who can relate to students, so that people can feel they get it. Because the best thing my students can say is, Doc gets it. Doc gets it. Right now with the remote learning, somebody asked me about that. Yeah, there are challenges. There are challenges for Black children, Latino children, Native American children of color, and children in general. If they don't have, for so many reasons. My wife is in South Carolina right now at our house in Hilton Head, working with my 9-year-old grandson because he's got attentiveness problems, ADHD. It's hard to sit in front of this as a 9-year-old and be attentive. EJ will do anything but do that. So she's got to be like a general on him. And then she'll call me and say, I'm calling Papa. Wait a minute, to give me the help. You got to do all that to, and he's blessed since his parents are working to have grandparents, grandmom there and me here. But every child doesn't have that. And right now it means children are going further and further behind. And we've got to think about that as we think about what we can do to make up for this past year. Very important question.
That leads right into the very last question that I had, which was about the pandemic. And yes. I wondered what your thoughts were. A good number of us on this call are in a class called Connected Teaching in the Digital Age, while we're looking at all of this right now. And so what do you think in terms of like when this is over? Are we, some people say we'll never be the same. Some people say we go back to business as usual. What are your...
No, we won't go back to business as usual. We'll have more people using technology more than ever. We've all been learning. We'll keep learning because the technology will keep developing. It's going to be different. And we will be able to do more things hybrid. There's no doubt about that. Even if the kids are in the classroom, they can do more things hybrid. But I want to tell you this about the pandemic. This is the thing that gives me goosebumps. I said it at the last lecture. You heard me. Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, look her up. Black woman. Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett grew up in a little town, Hillsborough, North Carolina. She's fabulous. She's my graduate. She was in the MILE program, came to me when she was 17. Majored in biology and sociology, and that connecting made a difference. Taught about socioeconomic factors involving health disparities. She went back to Chapel Hill, got a PhD. Now she's at NIH, but she's the first Black woman in the world to create a vaccine. Now that should give everybody goosebumps. First Black woman in the world to create vaccines. Google her. She's in the most recent Time magazine. She's in the most recent People's. Look at the piece on her when she talks on CNN with Cooper Anderson. And I tell you all that to say, I want every little girl to see this Black woman. I tell CEOs, when you get that vaccine, see the face of this Black woman who created that for you, because what it says is that our children can do anything. And this is what we must tell the world. Yes, our children can do anything and can save the world. And she is the perfect example of that. I think times will be different. I think we'll be understanding more than ever, given the lack of trust about the vaccine, from the Tuskegee study to Hopkins, that we must have more people of color in science and engineering, in medicine, in public health than ever before, if we want to protect all of us, and that we are more connected. Whether we want to be or not, we are more connected in the world, more connected in this country. And if we still have first-line workers, people of color sick, we'll all be sick, because that's the point about contagion. And there's something symbolic about that if we want to be healthy, they've got to be healthy. We all have to be healthy. So I think it's a time when we're going to do much more to encourage more people who are becoming educated, who are in science and tech and medicine and public health. And when we realize we can learn so much from our children and from young people.
This like made my day. Like, can we all unmute and say thanks? I'm like, man, can he be our mentor?
Yeah, so well done. Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Keep the passion, folks. Anybody who is excellent has passion. Keep the passion. Don't let anybody else define who you are. And just remember, you are far more special than you even realize.
Do you have any, like, what keeps you going as a leader? Is there any leadership tips?
I tell you, my students are always keeping me going, because they're always saying, Doc, pump us up. Come on, talk to us. And I'm saying, and they say, what makes you succeed? I said, because I'm too scared to fail. I got to do it, right? We all know that. Our folks are looking at us, our people who've gone on. We stand on their shoulders, and so I'm impressed by all of you and what you're doing, and you're being in this kind of space, and you're still speaking your truth. You can speak your truth and still move ahead. That's my message. You can speak your truth and still move ahead. Just take your time, figure out the best expression, the best manner in which to say it, right? So that people will hear it and receive it. That's my message to you. And just know, I will say to you what I always say, keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. You're going to be okay. I do tell all students who go for PhDs, write it down somewhere. I told you I did it when I was 13. I was saying good morning. By the time I was in grad school, coming from Hampton to Illinois, Hampton that was nurturing, Illinois that was big and very much not looking like myself, me. I would go for days and not see anybody of color. And then I'd see a light-skinned little young, light brown young woman to be my new wife. And we would wave to each other through all the people. That's a true story, true story. But I kept in my pocket, in my wallet, something that said, "Good morning, Dr. Hrabowski." When I get discouraged, I just look at it. And I tell my undergrads, I call them doctor already. So think about that as you get masters and PhDs, write it down somewhere. If you can see it, you can be it. Remember that.
All right, we can unmute one more time and say thanks. Thank you, Dr. Hrabowski.
Thank
Have a
you.
great
Thank
afternoon.
you. This is great.
You all inspired me today. Take care now.
All right, take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Keep hope alive.
You too. Man.